I've heard people say that betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from family. I never really believed that until the summer of 2012, when I lost not only the man I thought I'd marry, but the sister I'd grown up protecting. I was 39 back then, old enough to think I knew how life worked. My name is Margaret, but my friends call me Maggie. Back then, I still believed that family would always stand by you, that we'd fight, sure, but that some lines could never be crossed. We were a big Irish-American family in upstate New York, the kind you picture crowded around a Sunday roast with gravy boats and mismatched plates. 3 generations talking over each other. My youngest sister, Caroline, was always the beautiful one. Bright blonde hair that caught every bit of sunlight. A laugh that made people lean in just to hear it again. People loved Caroline. And for the longest time, so did I. I spent so many years being the big sister, the protector, the fixer. The one who made excuses when she'd mess up a college class or show up late for dinner. When our mother died, that bond only got tighter. Or at least I thought it did. Looking back, I wonder if I mistook her charm for loyalty. Maybe I didn't want to see the cracks. Maybe it was easier to play blind than to admit my sister and I was standing on different sides of an invisible line. I suppose there are always signs when someone you love is about to let you down. Little signs, like a shadow you can't quite catch. But when you love someone that deeply, you write those shadows off as your own insecurities. That's what I did, until the day I walked around the corner of my father's garden and saw what I wasn't meant to see. A truth so raw, it burned through every memory we'd ever shared. You know, there are some memories you replay in your head 1,000 times, hoping if you see them enough, they'll lose their edge. But betrayal has a way of staying sharp. It reminds you that you can never really know another person, even the ones who sat at your table every Christmas, laughing beside you, while secrets grew like weeds just beyond your reach. When people hear my story, they ask, why didn't you see it sooner, Maggie? But love and family can blind you faster than anything else. We tell ourselves stories to keep the peace, to keep that warm sense of belonging alive. Until the lie grows so big, it breaks through the walls you built to hold it back. I'm not telling this for sympathy. I'm telling it because I know I'm not the only one who's felt that sting. Maybe you've felt it too. That moment when the people you'd defend with your life revealed they'd trade your trust for something as cheap as a stolen kiss. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow unraveling, a thread pulled here, a secret whispered there. And if I'd listened to my gut instead of letting guilt and doubt drown it out, maybe I could have spared myself. But the truth is, some betrayals are meant to find you. They force you to see the family you thought you had, and the family you really do. So let me take you back to where it all began. To Caroline's perfect wedding plans, our father's backyard, and a life that looked, for a while, like something out of a Sunday afternoon picture frame. Before the whispers, before the lingering glances, before the kiss that broke us. I want you to see the good that came before the ruin, so you'll understand just how much there was to lose. Because sometimes, the hardest part of a betrayal isn't what it takes away, it's what it shows you was never really there to begin with. And for me, it all started with a love story that should have belonged to Caroline, but for one short, devastating moment, almost became mine instead. When I think back to my childhood, with Caroline, it feels like peering through an old lace curtain, pretty from a distance, but full of tiny holes if you dare to look too close. We grew up in a modest blue house on the edge of Albany, New York, the kind of neighborhood where every family knew who was fighting, who got a promotion, who forgot to mow their lawn. My father, Patrick O'Leary, worked at the post office for 30 years, and my mother, Mary, ran the household with a warm but iron hand. To the neighbors, we looked picture perfect. 2 daughters, only 4 years apart, always wearing second-hand dresses, pressed so crisp you'd think they were new. Caroline and I were different from the start. I was the responsible one, the helper. I learned how to cook a pot roast by 12, while Caroline was outside catching fireflies and weaving them into her hair like a crown. When our parents threw backyard cookouts, I'd be carrying trays of lemonade, clearing plates before anyone asked. Caroline, she'd be twirling on the lawn, telling jokes to the neighbors, making everyone laugh so loud they'd forget I was even there. It's not that I resented her back then. It was just the way things were. She was our mother's favorite story too. Tell the one about the miracle baby who came after a miscarriage, the girl who made people smile when they were down. Meanwhile, I was the steady hand, the good girl, the one who never needed to be asked twice. And in a way, I wore that like a badge of honor. I thought if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, I'd be loved just as deeply, in my own, dependable way. Sometimes I wonder if that's where the crack began. When you're the helper for too long, people forget you have needs of your own. They see you as the strong one, the one who'll keep forgiving, keep showing up, keep picking up the pieces no matter how many times they're dropped. And Caroline, God bless her, she counted on that more than anyone. I still remember the first time she turned one of my secrets into her own story. We were teenagers then. I'd written this shy, clumsy love note to a boy named Matthew Kelly, who lived 2 streets over. Caroline found it under my pillow, read it out loud to her friends, and they all burst into giggles while I stood there, cheeks burning. I told myself it was harmless, just girls being girls. But deep down, something in me knew my sister didn't see boundaries the way I did. For her, anything could be turned into a joke, a trick, a prize to win. By the time we were in our 20s, Caroline's charm was still her greatest weapon. She'd breeze into a room, and every head would turn. I'd be standing next to her at a cousin's wedding or a church fundraiser, and it was like I'd disappeared into her shadow. I told myself I didn't mind. After all, family comes first, right? I'd smile politely while she told stories that painted her life like a fairy tale, sprinkling in just enough drama to keep everyone hooked. No one saw the way she'd lean close to a man's arm, laughing just a little too brightly. Or if they did, they turned the other way. Caroline was just being Caroline. That's what people always said. The older we got, the more I wondered if maybe I'd spent my whole life playing the wrong part. I thought being loyal would keep us close forever. But in truth, loyalty can make you blind. You hold on so tight to what you wish your family was, that you stop seeing what they really are. I know now that love without honesty is just a pretty lie waiting to break you. And Caroline's charm, that golden halo that made her the darling of every family gathering, hid the truth I never wanted to admit, that even your own flesh and blood can take what you love most and claim it as their own, without a moment's hesitation. If you'd told me then that my little sister would stand in my shoes and do the unthinkable, I'd have sworn on my mother's grave you were wrong. But secrets, like weeds, always find the light. And once they break through the cracks, there's no going back to the days when you believed shadows were just shadows. You start to see them for what they really are. Warning signs you missed. Over and over again. I suppose that's why, when Caroline met Daniel, the man I thought would be my future, I wanted so badly to believe this time was different, that the sister who once laughed at my first love letter would never cross the line again. But some lessons take a lifetime to learn. And for me, the real lesson was still waiting just around the corner, behind a garden hedge that would show me the sister I'd always loved was a stranger all along. Caroline's wedding was supposed to be the crown jewel in our family's story. The fairy tale ending my mother always prayed for. Back when she'd sit at the kitchen table, clipping recipes from Good Housekeeping, and dreaming of the day both her daughters would have husbands to lean on. After Mom passed, I think Dad clung to that dream like a lifeline. He wanted to see at least one of us walk down the aisle with everything in place. The perfect dress, the doting groom, the neighbors whispering about how lucky they were. And Caroline, of course, knew exactly how to play that part. She'd met Mark at the hospital, where she worked as a pediatric nurse, the good girl in scrubs, the angel with a clipboard. Mark was steady, patient, the kind of man who made you believe family values weren't just something you heard about on Sunday mornings. When they got engaged, it was like the whole town celebrated. Dad bragged about it at the diner. Our cousins threw her a bridal shower with too much pink ribbon and too much cheap champagne. I still remember sitting beside Caroline on her couch that spring, a stack of bridal magazines scattered across her lap. She asked me to help her pick flower arrangements, table runners, and the perfect shade of blush for the bridesmaids' dresses. She said it like a promise. Mags, I can't do this without you. And stupidly, I believed her. Even as I sat there tracing the outline of her engagement ring with my eyes, I kept telling myself this was how it should be. Sisters planning a wedding together, giggling about the bachelorette weekend, sharing secrets late into the night. Funny how you can trick yourself into thinking you're needed, when really you're just there to make someone else shine brighter. I was so wrapped up in making sure Caroline's big day went perfectly that I ignored the tiny pricks in my gut. The uneasy feeling when Daniel, my boyfriend of 4 years, started offering to run errands with Caroline instead of me. Or when I'd catch them sitting too close at our father's kitchen table, laughing over something I hadn't heard. I told myself it was stress. Weddings make everyone act different. That's what I said to Dad when he asked if I was holding up okay, since I'd been staying late after work and barely sleeping. I laughed it off. Said, "She's my sister, Dad. I'd do anything for her." And I meant it. God help me. I meant every word. I think that's what makes the sting of betrayal so hard to heal from. You remember how pure your love was. How you would have carried every box, folded every napkin, taken every midnight phone call just to see her happy. You remember the Saturdays spent helping her pick out centerpieces. The Sunday mornings stuffing invitation envelopes while she made mimosas and told you how lucky she felt. And all the while, you didn't see the look in her eyes when Daniel was around. Or maybe you did, but you turned away because the lie was easier than the truth. When Caroline found her wedding dress, satin, simple, the kind Mom would have adored, she cried in the fitting room while I stood behind her, straightening the train. I told her she looked like a dream, and for a moment I let myself believe that dream belonged to both of us. That after all the years of rivalry, small betrayals, and hurt feelings, we'd finally come together the way sisters were supposed to. If I'd known what was coming, I think I would have stood in that tiny bridal boutique just a little longer, held on to the illusion that there were some lines Caroline would never cross. But the truth doesn't wait forever. It was already there in the subtle glances, the unfinished sentences. The nights Daniel came home late, without explanation. I just wasn't ready to see it yet. Sometimes people say you can feel the storm coming before you see the first dark cloud. And looking back, I think the storm was already overhead that spring. I just refused to look up. Because love for family can make you blind, until it doesn't. Until it rips away the veil and shows you what's been waiting there in plain sight all along. The first red flags didn't come crashing down like thunder. They whispered instead. The kind of whispers you almost convinced yourself you imagined. At first, it was just small things. So ordinary that I hate myself now for how quickly I brushed them aside. It started with a laugh that lasted just a bit too long. Caroline had always laughed freely. But there's a difference between laughing with family and leaning in so close to someone else's man that you forget where you are. One Friday night, Daniel and I hosted a little cookout in our backyard. Cheap burgers, a case of beer, a handful of friends. Caroline showed up late, like she always did. Arms full of store-bought potato salad, and her smile big enough to light up the whole block. She hugged Daniel first. It was quick, nothing overtly wrong. But I remember how her hand lingered on his shoulder, her eyes holding his just a beat longer than they needed to. Daniel didn't pull away. He just laughed and poured her a drink. I told myself it was nothing. That's what good sisters do, right? They don't keep score. But as the weeks went on, those little moments piled up like snow you don't shovel because you think it'll melt on its own. One afternoon, Caroline asked Daniel to help her pick up some furniture she'd bought for her new place with Mark. She called me after the fact, chirping on about how Dan is so handy. "Mags, you're lucky." That should have been a compliment. It felt like a bruise instead. At family dinners, I caught her watching him when she thought no one noticed. And every time I looked her way, she'd glance off, change the subject, or drag Mark into some wedding plan she needed to fuss over. It was like watching someone reach across an invisible fence, testing how far they could go before the dog barks. And I guess I was the dog, leashed by guilt and a lifetime of telling myself that Caroline would never hurt me. I remember one night, a week before her bridal shower, Daniel and I were curled up on the couch, watching an old rerun of MASH*, when his phone buzzed. He didn't even try to hide it, just picked it up and started tapping back a reply, half smiling to himself. I asked who it was, pretending to sound casual. He said, "It's just Carolyn, asking about the playlist for the shower. She wants my opinion." I laughed it off, but why did she need his opinion? Why not mine? And then came the friends. It's funny how people on the outside see the cracks before you do. One evening, my oldest friend Ruth pulled me aside after we'd all had dinner at my place. She told me, as gently as she could, "Maggie, I know you love your sister, but something about the way she looks at Daniel, I don't like it. You should watch that." I brushed her off with a joke about Ruth reading too many tabloid stories, but I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, hearing her words repeat like a leaky faucet. The next day, I tried to talk to Daniel. I asked him if he'd noticed Carolyn acting a little off. He just chuckled and kissed the top of my head. "Babe, you're imagining things," he said. "She's your sister. She loves you. She's just excited." Weddings make people weird. That's what he called it. Weird, not disrespectful, not crossing a line, just weird. And the worst part was, I wanted so badly to believe him that I let his dismissal settle into my bones. Looking back, I see how those early warnings were like smoke curling under a door. The fire was already burning. I just didn't want to face the flames, because facing them would mean admitting that the people I trusted most were the same ones setting the match. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. Even the smallest red flags have a way of growing into banners when you refuse to see them. And soon enough, I'd find myself staring at a betrayal so obvious, it would knock the breath right out of my chest. Because secrets have a way of blooming in the dark until one day they stand in the sunlight, daring you to keep pretending they're not there. I think the worst part of betrayal isn't the act itself. It's the way it makes you question whether you're even allowed to feel what you feel. The months before Caroline's wedding, I didn't just lose trust in Daniel or my sister. I lost trust in myself, piece by piece, until I couldn't tell the difference between my instincts and my paranoia. I'd catch little things, the quick silences when I'd walk into the room, the inside jokes they'd share that I didn't get. And every time I brought it up, I felt like a fool opening old wounds no one else could see. I'd sit across from Caroline at Dad's kitchen table, her wedding binder spread open between us, and I'd try to push the words out. I'd ask her if maybe she was leaning on Daniel too much for things she could just ask me. She'd tilt her head, blink those wide blue eyes, and let out a soft laugh, like I'd just accused her of stealing the moon. "Oh, Mags, come on," she'd say, her voice dripping with concern that felt too sweet to be real. "Daniel's like my brother, you know that. You're just stressed. You've been doing so much for me. You need to relax more. Get some sleep," I told myself. She was right. Maybe it was me. Maybe I was overworked, overtired, oversensitive. Daniel didn't help either. Every time I asked him if something felt off, he'd slip into that calm, patient tone that made me feel childish for even asking. He'd brush his thumb over my cheek, kiss my forehead, and tell me to stop worrying so much. "You've always been the anxious one, babe. You read too much into things. Caroline loves you. She'd never do anything to hurt you." At first, it soothed me. It made me feel safe to believe I was just imagining it all. But the comfort never lasted long. Each time I swallowed my gut feeling, it would come back sharper the next time. Like a splinter you keep pressing deeper under the skin until it's infected and aching. I'd find myself second-guessing my own shadow. If I asked too many questions, I was needy. If I stayed quiet, I was cold. It felt like no matter what I did, I was the problem. What they did to me had a name. I just didn't know it yet. Gaslighting. It's such a simple word for something so insidious. It turns your mind into a house of mirrors, where every reflection makes you doubt your own eyes. One minute you're so sure you've seen something real. The next, you're apologizing for even bringing it up. That's the cruelty of it. You start to hate the voice inside you that's trying so hard to protect you. There was one night that still sits heavy on my chest. We were at my dad's for dinner, just the four of us. Like old times. Carolyn made her famous roast chicken, and Daniel opened a bottle of red. I was quiet most of the meal, too busy watching how their eyes kept finding each other across the table. When Caroline reached over to brush something off Daniel's shirt, my fork clattered onto my plate. It was such an innocent thing, but it made my heart squeeze like a fist. Later, I pulled Daniel aside in the hallway, near the old family photos Mom used to hang. I asked him, plain and shaky, "Do you want her? Do you even want me anymore?" He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Jesus, Maggie," he said, his voice low and careful, like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "You need to get help if you really think that. Caroline is your sister. This is all in your head." I stood there, my back against the wall, staring at that picture of my parents holding us when we were kids. Carolyn with her bow-tied curls, me with my serious eyes, and I felt something inside me go quiet. Like a part of me that used to scream warnings finally gave up trying. When you love people that much, you give them your trust on a silver platter, and they'll keep taking it, piece by piece, until there's nothing left for you to stand on. That was the night I realized what I was up against. It wasn't just my sister and my boyfriend. It was the version of myself that kept forgiving, kept explaining away what I knew was true. But even then, I wasn't ready to walk away. I still needed proof, the kind you can't deny, the kind that rips the blindfold off once and for all. And that proof was waiting for me. Closer than I ever imagined, in the place I thought I'd always be safe, my family's home. It was a warm Saturday in late May, when everything that had been twisting in the shadows finally stepped out into the light. Just enough for me to see what I hadn't wanted to see all along. My father, God bless him, thought that throwing a family cookout would help ease the tension he'd felt brewing between his girls. He kept saying we'd all been too busy, too stressed, that we needed to come together, share good food, and remind ourselves what mattered most. I wish life worked that way, that you could patch over a festering wound with potato salad and a few cold beers. Caroline showed up with Mark, her sweet, gentle fiancé, who never could read a room when it came to his bride-to-be. She floated around the yard like the star of the show, hugging our aunts, laughing too loud, taking selfies with cousins she hadn't called in months. Daniel stayed close to my side for the first hour, grilling hot dogs with my dad and stealing kisses from me between buns and mustard jars. For a while, I almost let myself believe it would all be okay. But you know that feeling when you can sense a storm before you hear the thunder? That's how it felt when I stepped inside to help my dad find the extra pack of hamburger patties. I was only gone 10 minutes, maybe less, but when I came back out the sliding glass door, the laughter near the picnic table had shifted. People were scattered in little clusters. Mark chatting with my uncle by the fire pit, Caroline nowhere to be seen, and Daniel, he wasn't by the grill anymore. I don't know what drew me to the far corner of the yard, where my mother's rose bushes still bloomed in a half-wild hedge. Maybe it was a sound, a soft giggle that felt too out of place. Maybe it was just that pull you feel when your gut is screaming at you to turn back, but your feet keep moving anyway. I rounded the corner of the house, stepping past the old garden hose and the wooden trellis Dad built the year after Mom died, and there they were. It wasn't some dramatic, passionate scene. Not yet. They were standing close. Too close. Caroline's hand was resting on Daniel's chest as she leaned in, whispering something that made him laugh in that quiet, intimate way that lovers do when they think no one's watching. Her head tilted just enough that her hair brushed his jawline. I swear the world went silent. I could see the sun catching in Caroline's hair, that same hair I used to braid for her before Sunday school. I could see Daniel's hand hovering at her waist, not pulling her in, not pushing her away, just resting there like he'd forgotten where he was, who he belonged to. I wanted to shout. I wanted to walk up and demand they tell me what the hell was so funny in my mother's garden. But I didn't. I stood there, frozen behind the hedge, watching them dance on the edge of a line they had no business crossing. My heart slammed, so hard I thought they'd hear it. And for one wild second, I told myself maybe it was innocent, maybe I was imagining it again. But then Caroline's hand slid up to Daniel's neck, and he didn't flinch. He just leaned in, smiling like they were sharing the sweetest secret. I stepped on a twig, the smallest snap, but it was enough. They broke apart, like startled kids caught smoking behind the gym. Caroline's eyes darted to mine, wide and unblinking. Daniel looked like he'd been slapped awake, mouth opening but no words coming out. I wanted one of them to say something, anything. Explain it away. Make me feel crazy again, the way they always did. But they just stood there, mouths moving, nothing real coming out on that moment. The cookout kept going on the other side of the yard. Laughter, the clink of bottles. Mark's voice drifting through the lilac bushes as he bragged about Caroline's new job to my uncle. It felt obscene. All that normal life happening just 20 feet away, while my world cracked open in the shadows of my mother's roses. I didn't scream. I didn't confront them right then. Maybe part of me wanted to watch them squirm, to see if they'd run after me, beg me to forgive what they were too cowardly to confess. But they didn't move when I turned and walked away, my feet numb in the grass, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold the serving spoon when Dad called me over to help with the potato salad. I stood there the rest of that afternoon, dishing out food and smiling at cousins I couldn't hear, my eyes flicking to Caroline and Daniel every chance I got. And every time they avoided my gaze, I knew the truth had finally stepped out of the shadows. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, waiting for the final push that would send everything I knew about family and love tumbling into the dark. And that push was coming sooner than I could bear to imagine. A few days after that cookout, I woke up to the kind of knot in my chest that you can't drink away with a strong coffee or push aside with a busy to-do list. It sat there like a rock on my ribs, daring me to keep pretending I hadn't seen what I'd seen. I knew then that if I didn't find my voice now, I'd be haunted by my own silence for the rest of my life. So I called Caroline, my voice steady but my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I asked her to meet me at Mulligan's Cafe, the old place off Main Street where we used to share slices of pecan pie after Sunday Mass. She didn't suspect a thing. Of course she didn't. When I walked in, she was already there, perched in the corner booth, waving at me like we were teenagers again. For a moment, I almost wanted to run. I almost wanted to bury it all under a fresh layer of polite sisterhood and pretend we were okay. But the truth doesn't let you run forever. It finds you. It sits down beside you at a booth with peeling leather seats and dares you to say its name. We ordered coffee, though I could barely taste mine. Caroline launched right into wedding talk, telling me about the final dress fitting, how she was thinking of changing her hairstyle last minute, how Mark had been working late, but she didn't mind because it gave her more me time. Went on like nothing had happened, like I hadn't caught her hand on my boyfriend's chest just days before. I waited. I let her talk. I let her paint her picture-perfect life, every brushstroke more bitter than the last. When she finally paused to take a breath, I put my cup down, careful not to let it rattle on the saucer. I looked her dead in the eye and asked, "How long have you been lying to me?" She blinked once, twice, that innocent dyed look she'd perfected since we were kids. "Mags, what are you talking about?" Her voice was light, dismissive, as if I'd just accused her of borrowing my sweater without asking. I told her what I'd seen in Dad's garden, how it wasn't just a hug, how I'd felt it in my gut for months. I laid it all out on that sticky cafe table, every half-glance, every whispered joke, every secret she thought she could keep tucked behind rose bushes and backyard shadows. At first she laughed, not a real laugh, that brittle kind that cracks at the edges when the truth presses in too close. "You're paranoid," she said, her hands fluttering to her hair. "You always have been. Daniel loves you. You're my sister. How could you even think?" But the more I pushed, the more her mask slipped. I told her about the looks that lingered too long, about the excuses that never added up. I told her I'd been losing sleep, second-guessing my sanity, trying so hard to believe her when every cell in my body was screaming that I shouldn't. Her smile faltered. Her fingers drummed on her coffee cup like she was itching to bolt for the door. Then came the anger, sharp and fast. She leaned in close, her voice low and cold, and asked, "Why are you trying to ruin my wedding? Why can't you just be happy for me? You always want to play the victim. Maggie, maybe if you didn't smother Daniel so much, he wouldn't have to lean on me for anything." It felt like being slapped in the face, but I didn't flinch. I held her stare, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the clatter of dishes behind the counter. I told her she could spin it however she wanted to me, to Mark, to the whole town if she pleased. But I wasn't going to swallow her lies anymore. I told her I'd loved her more than anyone in this world, and she'd carved that love up, piece by piece, just to feel adored by someone who was never hers to take. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look sorry. She just scoffed, grabbed her purse, and slid out of that booth like we were strangers at a bus stop. I watched her push through the glass door, the little bell chiming behind her like a cruel farewell. I sat there long after she left, my hands trembling around a cold cup of coffee I couldn't drink. People around me laughed and stirred cream into their mugs, oblivious to the fault line that had just cracked open in that dusty corner booth. I knew then that nothing about this wedding was ever going to be the same. The lie was out. The truth was bigger than both of us now, and soon, it wouldn't just be me and Carolyn living with it. It would be Daniel, Mark, our father, everyone we'd ever pulled into our perfect family picture. And I had no idea that what I'd just set in motion would crash over all of us like a tidal wave, one that no amount of pretty white dresses or polite Sunday dinners could ever wash away. I wish I could tell you that after that cafe showdown, I found some peace, that I felt stronger for finally saying out loud what had been rotting my heart from the inside out. But the truth is, naming a betrayal doesn't kill it. It just strips away your last excuses for pretending it might not be real. And when you've spent your whole life trying to be the good daughter, the forgiving sister, the woman who keeps the family together, no matter what, it leaves you standing in a storm without an umbrella. After Caroline stormed out, I thought maybe she'd call me back, maybe she'd come to her senses, apologize, tell me it was all some giant misunderstanding. She didn't. Days went by in silence, just me and my thoughts, and the echo of that damn bell over Mulligan's door. I kept replaying it all, the garden, the looks, the touch, the way Daniel brushed me off every time I tried to bring it up. By the time Friday rolled around, I was living in a haze, half of me wanting proof, so solid no one could ever make me doubt myself again, and the other half too afraid to see what that proof would cost me. That Friday evening, I drove over to my father's place. He'd been nagging me to come by, check on the flowers Mom had planted before she passed, help him get the back porch cleaned up for the wedding guests. I think I just needed to feel useful again, needed to do something that didn't make me feel like my own heartbeat was lying to me. Dad was in the shed, fixing the old mower, humming some Irish tune off-key, the way he always did when he didn't want to talk about anything serious. I wandered through the yard, tracing my hand over the wild lilacs and the rose bushes that had seen more family secrets than any of us cared to admit. And then I heard it, a hushed voice, low but too close, followed by a laugh I knew better than my own name. I don't remember walking around the hedge. I just remember the snap in my chest when I saw them. Daniel and Caroline, half hidden by the side of the garage, bodies pressed so tight together, they could have been one person. She had her hands fisted in his hair, his face buried in her neck, her legs hitched around his hips, like they'd been practicing this embrace in their heads for weeks. It wasn't just a moment anymore. It was them, barefaced and shameless, tearing apart what was left of my faith in them with every touch. It's funny what your mind does. When you see the thing you'd spent months convincing yourself could never happen, it goes quiet. My feet felt like they were nailed to the grass. All the air left my lungs at once. I swear I could hear my mother's voice in my head, telling me to turn around, don't let it destroy you. But there it was, destroying me anyway. I must have made a sound, some raw, broken noise that ripped itself out of my throat, because they jolted apart like I'd fired a gun. Caroline's eyes went wide, lips parted as she slid off him, hair a mess, shirt half untucked, like she'd been caught in the middle of a teenage daydream. Daniel just stood there, arms limp at his sides, mouth opening and closing like he was searching for a lie big enough to cover up what I'd just seen. "It's not what it looks like," he said, voice cracking. The cowardice in those words burned more than the kiss itself. I laughed, an ugly guttural sound that felt like it came from someplace far below my ribs. I asked him, "Then what is it, Daniel? What is it if it's not this?" Caroline tried to come closer, her hand reaching out like she thought she could calm me down. The same hand that had been clutching the back of his neck seconds ago. I flinched away so hard, I nearly fell into the rose bushes. I told her to stop. Told her I never wanted to hear another word come out of her mouth again. She started to cry then, crocodile tears that slid down her cheeks and made her look like the wounded party. She whispered she was sorry, that it just happened, that she didn't mean for any of it to go this far. But when I looked in her eyes, I didn't see guilt. I saw hunger, the same hunger that had been there when she was 17, reading my love note out loud in front of her friends, just to prove she could take whatever I loved. I don't know how long I stood there, my hands balled into fists, my whole body shaking so violently I thought my knees would buckle. Dad was still humming in the shed, oblivious to the war unraveling just steps away from his lawnmower. For one wild moment, I thought about calling him out, forcing them to face him and confess what they'd done under his roof. But the truth was too heavy to share, too humiliating to watch land on his tired shoulders. So I turned and ran, not dramatically, just fast enough that they couldn't touch me again. I heard Daniel calling my name, footsteps crunching on the gravel behind me, but I didn't look back. I drove away with my heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack open my ribs. By the time I got home, my phone was already buzzing. His name, her name, over and over like a curse I couldn't block. I turned it off, sat in my car for what felt like an hour, staring at my own porch light, and wondering how a house that once felt safe could feel so unfamiliar in a single night. They say betrayal changes you, but what they don't tell you is how quiet the world gets after you see it for what it is. How your own mind finally stops screaming that you're paranoid. Because the truth is standing there in the open, ugly and undeniable. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can only decide what kind of woman you're going to be after the final lie has been ripped away. And for me, that decision was waiting on the other end of a phone call I never thought I'd have to make, the one that would drag the truth into the light for everyone to see, whether they were ready for it or not. When you carry a truth that big, it weighs you down until you either bury it or lay it bare for someone who deserves to know. And Mark, poor Mark, deserved more honesty than anyone else caught in our ugly little triangle. I sat with it for days, replaying that moment by the roses, like a film I couldn't shut off. My mind stitching together what I'd say if I could find the words that wouldn't break us both. In the end, I didn't have a speech. Just a number in my phone, and a shaking hand pressing call. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and clueless in that way that made my heart ache for the man about to lose the life he thought he had. "Hey Maggie," he said, like he was glad to hear from me, like I was still the good sister-in-law to be, helping pick out floral centerpieces. I nearly hung up. But the truth is like a splinter you can't leave under your skin forever. It festers until you dig it out, no matter how much it hurts. I asked him if he had a minute, told him I needed to talk. He must have heard something in my voice, because he felt quiet, that careful, too polite, quiet people get when they know the world's about to tilt. I told him everything. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't defend Daniel or Caroline or myself. I told him about the cookout, the whispered laughs, the lingering touches, the corner of my father's yard where I found two people I trusted most, tangled up in a lie they'd wrapped around my throat for months. Mark didn't interrupt me. Not once. Every so often, I'd hear his breath catch on the other end, like he was trying to swallow back whatever rage or grief was building up in his chest. When I finished, the silence was so thick, I thought maybe he'd just hung up. Maybe he'd decided I was lying, or worse, that it was easier not to believe me. But then he spoke, his voice so level it made my eyes sting. "Thank you for telling me, Maggie," he said. "No one else would have had the guts." I didn't know what to say to that. Sorry felt useless. So I sat there on my back porch with my phone pressed to my ear, staring at the way the sunset bled through the trees, thinking about how sometimes the truth doesn't just set you free, it sets fire to everything you thought you could stand on. He asked me if I thought Caroline would admit it if he confronted her. I told him I doubted it. She'd twist it, cry, maybe even blame me for planting ideas in his head. I could hear him let out this low, pained laugh that broke something small inside me. He thanked me again, but this time his voice cracked. He said, "I guess I always knew she needed everyone to love her, even when it wasn't hers to take." I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault. I wanted to tell him that loving her didn't make him blind. It just made him hopeful in a world that's too often cruel to good men like him. But the words jammed up behind my teeth. There was nothing left to soften it. All I could do was sit with him in that quiet. The two of us connected by a betrayal neither of us chose, but both of us had to carry. Before he hung up, he told me not to worry about the wedding plans, that he'd handle it in his own way. I didn't know what that meant. Part of me wanted to warn him not to make a scene, not to let her spin him into her story, but I knew it wasn't my place anymore. We were all free-falling now, each of us bracing for the moment we'd hit the ground. After the line went dead, I sat there until the sun slipped behind the trees, and the porch light flicked on by itself. For the first time in weeks, I felt something that almost resembled relief. The secret wasn't mine alone to carry anymore. The cracks were out in the open, impossible to plaster over with a pretty dress and a fancy cake. And somewhere deep in my chest, I think I knew Mark wasn't the kind of man who would let this betrayal disappear behind closed doors. He'd want people to know, to see Caroline for who she'd really become. And maybe, just maybe, the truth would finally do what it was always meant to do: break the cycle, no matter how much it hurt to watch it all come undone. They say there's always a hush right before a big moment, that stretch of stillness when everyone holds their breath and believes, even for a second, that everything's going to go off without a hitch. Caroline's wedding day had that hush, heavy and deceptive. If you'd been standing outside St. Luke's that afternoon, you'd have seen nothing but a picture-perfect scene. White ribbons dancing on the church doors, my father fussing with his tie, our cousins gathered on the steps like they were posing for a Christmas card. You'd never have guessed that every smile was about to crack wide open. I didn't go inside at first. I stood under an old oak tree at the edge of the parking lot, far enough that no one could see the tremble in my hands. I'd spent the whole night before awake in my childhood bedroom, listening to the house creak, my stomach twisted in knots. Part of me still hoped Mark would just walk away quietly, call it off in a way that spared him the humiliation. But Mark wasn't the type to pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. He was too honest for that, to hurt, and too tired of being the last to know. When the doors opened and the organ began to play, I forced myself to step closer. Through the glass I could see Caroline at the back of the aisle, a vision in white lace and borrowed pearls. Our mother's rosary wrapped around her wrist like some last-ditch plea for forgiveness. She looked radiant, and for one painful second I felt sorry for her, for the part of her that couldn't stop taking even when she had enough. I found a seat near the back pew, trying to keep my breathing steady. I watched Mark standing at the altar, stiff in his dark suit, his hands folded so tight his knuckles went pale. If anyone else noticed the crack in his perfect groom mask, they didn't show it. They smiled at him the way they'd always smiled at Caroline, as if they'd already decided how the story would go. But not this time. When Caroline reached the altar, she slipped her arm through his. I swear, for a moment, she looked so sure of herself, so certain she'd talk her way out of this, that her pretty words and practiced tears would save her one more time. But when the priest asked if anyone had any reason these two should not be joined, Mark didn't stay silent, like the movies say you're supposed to. He cleared his throat just once, and looked her dead in the eye. His voice was calm. Too calm. He said, "Before I make any vows today, I think our friends and family deserve to know the truth. You could feel the air get sucked right out of that church. Caroline tried to laugh it off, that high, nervous titter that used to melt every scolding from Dad when we were kids. But Mark didn't flinch. He told them all, our father, our aunts, every neighbor and friend crammed into those wooden pews, exactly what he'd learned about Caroline and Daniel, about the months of stolen glances and secret touches, about the lie that had curled its way through our family while we all sat around pretending not to notice the smell of smoke. I watched our father's face go slack, the color draining like someone had pulled the plug on all his hopes at once. Caroline's mouth opened, but no words came out this time. For once, her charm failed her. There was no spin that could save her here. No sister left to run interference. The silence after Mark finished was so complete, it felt holy, like the church itself was stunned into prayer for something already gone. Then, without waiting for anyone to drag him back, Mark looked at my father and said he was sorry. Sorry for the pain, sorry for the lie, but not sorry for refusing to stand there and pretend to be a groom for a woman who'd betrayed him in the worst way. And just like that, he walked away, down the aisle, past Caroline's shaking shoulders and the whispers that rose like a wave behind him. I don't know what broke me more, the sound of my sister's sobs echoing off the stained glass, or the sight of Mark's shoulders squared, like a man who'd just shed every false promise he'd ever been sold. I slipped out before the shouting started, before my father could look at me with the question I couldn't bear to answer, how long did you know? I stepped into the sunlight, the crisp fall air hitting my cheeks like a slap, and for the first time in months, I felt something new, something cold and sharp but clean, the weight of the truth finally free, no longer mine alone to carry. And I knew then that what came next wouldn't be easy, but at least the lie was dead, buried right there at the altar where my sister thought she'd tie the knot. It wasn't the ending she'd planned for her perfect day, but maybe it was the one we all needed. The only one that could burn it all down so something honest could grow in the ashes. In the days after the wedding fell apart, the O'Leary house felt like the last house on a block after a hurricane. Everything looked the same from the outside, but step through the front door and you'd see the splinters, the broken beams, the soaked carpet that would never be quite clean again. People think the worst part of betrayal is the moment you catch them, the shock, the screaming, the heartbreak. But the truth is, it's what happens after that lingers like a stain no amount of scrubbing can erase. Dad wouldn't look at me. For a week, he kept pacing the kitchen, wiping down the counters over and over, the rag in his hand like a lifeline. Every so often he'd mutter that he couldn't believe his girls, could do this to each other. And I understood that look in his eyes, the quiet plea for me to tell him it was all a misunderstanding. But I didn't have any lies left to give him. I'd spent every last one protecting people who would never do the same for me. Caroline locked herself in her old bedroom like she was 16 again. The wedding dress, the one she'd cried happy tears over in the boutique, hung limp on the back of the door, its train spilling across the floor like a ghost she couldn't banish. I could hear her some nights through the thin walls, muffled sobs that should have made me feel sorry for her. Maybe once they would have, but now they just made me feel tired. Bone-tired of watching her rewrite every story until she could be the victim in it. It didn't take long for the calls to start. Aunt Kathy, who always loved to keep her nose in everyone's business, rang me up first. "Maggie, how could you?" she hissed, like I'd been the one caught behind the garage. "You could have let them handle it privately." Privately. As if a lie that deep could stay hidden without rotting the rest of us from the inside out. Other relatives followed, each one picking a side, even if they didn't say it outright. Family dinners were cancelled. The cousin group chat went silent. Thanksgiving came and went like a funeral, everyone polite and stiff, tiptoeing around the crater Caroline and Daniel had blown through us sometimes. I'd find Daniel's things tucked away in my house, a sweatshirt in the dryer, a stray coffee mug on the top shelf. Small reminders that once I'd let him into every corner of my life. He tried to call at first, leaving voicemails with that pathetic edge in his voice. "Mags, please. We need to talk." But there was nothing left to talk about. I blocked his number the day after the wedding and tossed every piece of him into a box I set by the curb. What surprised me most was how grief didn't come in one big wave. It trickled in around the edges of my day, folding laundry and finding one of his socks, passing the cafe where Caroline and I had sat pretending to be sisters worth trusting. Some nights, I'd stand by the kitchen window, staring out at Dad's garden, and wonder how many more secrets those rose bushes could hold before they stopped blooming altogether. And yet, beneath all that ruin, a strange thing started to grow. A thin root of something I hadn't felt in months. Clarity. Because when the worst has already happened, there's a freedom in knowing there's nothing left to hide. The family might never be the same, but at least we weren't pretending anymore. No more playing the good daughter, the forgiving sister. I'd spoken the truth, and if that truth left me standing alone in a house full of echoes and slammed doors, so be it. Caroline would have to find her own way to live with the mess she made. Maybe she'd spin a new story, the way she always did. Maybe people would believe her version. The tragic bride abandoned at the altar. The loyal sister, who turned on her out of jealousy. But deep down, in the hours before dawn, when the house creaked like an old ship in a storm, she'd remember the look on Mark's face. She'd remember my voice refusing to break. And maybe, just maybe, that would haunt her more than any punishment I could ever wish on her. I didn't know then how long it would take for my father to forgive me, or if he ever would. I didn't know what the holidays would look like, or whether I'd ever sit across the table from my sister again. But I did know this. I was still here. And sometimes surviving the fallout is the bravest thing you can do. The dust was still settling, but the silence that followed was honest in a way our family hadn't been in years. And maybe, in that quiet, something better, something real, could finally begin to grow. People talk about healing like it's a straight road, like once the storm passes, you sweep up the glass, repaint the walls, and go on living the way you did before. But the truth is, healing after a betrayal like this isn't a fresh coat of paint. It's more like living in a house you used to trust with your whole heart, only to realize the foundation has been cracked for years. And now, every creak in the floorboards reminds you that not everything broken can be put back the way it was. After Mark walked away from that altar, and Caroline's perfect day turned to ash, I spent weeks moving through my life like a ghost of myself. Mornings were the worst. The light hitting the empty side of the bed where Daniel used to toss his arm over my waist. The smell of his cologne still clung to the hallway closet. So I boxed up every shirt, every mug, every piece of him, and dropped them off at Goodwill, like you'd toss out spoiled food before it sours the whole fridge. For a while, I thought distance would fix it. I started driving to the next town over to buy groceries, just so I wouldn't run into people who'd heard whispers about the O'Leary sisters. But the truth always found me. A glance from a neighbor at the post office, an awkward pause when someone asked about the wedding that never was. It hurt in all the ways you'd expect. But there was a gift buried in that hurt too. A kind of clean, sharp freedom that comes when you finally run out of excuses to keep loving people who never deserved it. I started small. I took long walks through Dad's neighborhood after dinner, just to remind myself my legs could carry me somewhere new. I picked up extra shifts at the local library where I worked part-time, spending hours reshelving books and feeling that delicious hush you only find between rows of stories. Some nights, when the loneliness pressed down so hard I thought I'd cave in, I'd sit in my mother's old garden, pulling weeds until my fingernails were caked with dirt, telling her picture in my mind that I was sorry, not for what I'd done, but for what I'd let happen for so long. I started therapy too. It wasn't easy, saying it out loud to a stranger, that your sister and your boyfriend carved your trust up like a Sunday roast. But each time I spoke it, the shame shrank a little. The fog lifted. I learned that sometimes your gut feeling is the only thing standing between you and people who will gladly use your love like a door. They can sneak through when they're lonely or bored. And I learned that once you see betrayal for what it is, you don't ever have to let it in again. I won't pretend I forgave them overnight. Some nights, I still lie awake, replaying every choice, every moment when I could have slammed that door sooner. But the difference now is, I don't let that regret hold me hostage anymore. I remind myself that the woman who stood under that oak tree outside the church, the woman who didn't run when the truth cracked her life wide open, she deserves better than a lifetime of bitterness. Little by little, the pieces started coming back. Dad and I sat on the porch one evening, our coffee mugs warm in our hands. The silence finally soft instead of sharp. He didn't say he forgave me. He didn't have to. Just sitting there together, letting the crickets fill the spaces where words used to get stuck, felt like enough for now. And Caroline, well, she moved out of town for a while, tail tucked between her regrets and her excuses. She sent a letter once, months later, pages of half apologies and rewrites of our past. I read it once, folded it up, and tucked it in the bottom of my dresser drawer. Maybe one day I'll read it again. Maybe not. Some stories don't need revisiting. What I know for sure is that healing didn't come all at once. It came in the tiny choices. Standing up straighter in the grocery line, learning to trust my instincts again, letting myself believe that not everyone would twist my love into something cheap. The scar is still there. It always will be. But it's mine now, not theirs. And that, more than anything, is what sets me free to keep moving forward. Not as the good sister, not as the betrayed girlfriend, but as Maggie O'Leary, a woman who learned the hardest way possible that sometimes losing what you thought you needed is the only way you find who you really are. If you're still listening to this, maybe you've felt that crack in your own life, that splinter of doubt when the people you love most make you feel crazy for trusting your own eyes. Maybe you've sat up at 3 in the morning replaying every word, every look, asking yourself if you were too much, too suspicious, too hard to love. I hope you hear me when I say, you are not too much. You are not to blame for someone else crossing a line they promised never to touch. If I've learned anything from that garden, from that cafe, from the silence that came after, it's that your gut is not your enemy. It is your oldest, truest friend. It will whisper to you when your heart wants to stay blind. Listen to it. Stand up for it. You can love your family, your partner, your best friend, and still protect the quiet voice that says, this isn't right. And when you speak that truth, don't let anyone shame you into burying it. Because secrets like that don't stay buried. They grow wild in the dark until they break every good thing you built. Telling the truth might cost you people you thought you couldn't live without, but losing yourself is the higher price. I promise you that. So, if you're holding on to something tonight, if you feel the sting of a betrayal blooming under your skin, remember my story. Remember that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to say, no more. Not to punish them, but to set yourself free. And trust me, there is life after the lie. There is a you waiting on the other side, who is stronger than you ever thought you'd need to be, and better for it.